I don't want excuses. I know what you're up against. We're all of us up against something. So you better make up your mind. Because until you have the balls to look me straight in the eye and tell me this is all you deserve, I am not letting you fail. Even if that means coming to your house every night until you finish the work. I see who you are. Do you understand me? I can see you. And you are not failing. So, take a minute, pull yourself together, and come inside. I want a new evaluation.
Things come and go, especially in education, right? Things are always changing in our profession, but relationships with our students will always be what matters. And that's a recurring thing we bring up as a reminders on the podcast, because that's something that all these successful teachers voice is connecting and forming relationships with students. And there's so many benefits with establishing those relationships. So I want to encourage you, especially this time of year, as we're counting down to the next break. You've been with your students for a good while. Do you even know that much about them? I know from the successful teachers I see at my school, so many of them form great relationships with their students. Doesn't mean that every day is perfect, but man, so many of the other problems other teachers are struggling with, these guys don't, because they know their students. They've formed connections, and it really is truly remarkable to where I'm like, hey, if I had children, I would hope they would be in these particular teachers' classrooms, because not only are they creative and presenting the content effectively, but they really do enjoy having their students around them, and they enjoy coming to work and forming those relationships with the kids. And joining us today is Erin Gruwell. Currently, Erin serves as president of the Freedom Writers Foundation. We're going to get to that in a moment. But Erin has a fantastic story that's going to motivate a lot of us in the audience, especially this time of year. Maybe you're discouraged and need some motivation. You definitely want to make sure you tune into Erin's story. And she's also associated with the book, The Freedom Writer's Diary, How a Teacher and 150 Teens Use Writing to Change Themselves and the World Around Them. It's an amazing story of strength, courage, and achievement in the face of adversity. And her story shows how one person's actions against violence and snowball into a movement for peace and tolerance. And with that, Erin, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Brian. It's an honor, and I always am so humbled at the opportunity to share our story.
You have an amazing story. So I wanted to go back to your college days. What in the world made you want to become a teacher?
You know, I often say that it's the Los Angeles riots, and I had planned to be a lawyer and actually studied to do so. And until we had the Los Angeles riots, and it was such a traumatic experience that I realized I'd rather fight battles in a classroom than fighting battles in a courtroom. And it was just a pivotal moment that made me want to work with at-risk kids who saw the riots and or participated in the riots firsthand. And so Long Beach just happened to be a community that was hit very hard by the Rodney King verdict and those riots, and actually had 126 murders the summer before I began teaching. And so it seemed like the perfect place for me to try to make a difference. I think it was a calling. I hope it was a calling. And I just felt this gravitational pull to a community that was really in transition and a community in chaos. You know, I grew up in suburbia, and so the idea of being a teacher never crossed my mind, let alone teaching in an inner city school. But when I made the decision to make a difference, I felt like that was the perfect place, and it was the perfect school at the perfect time.
Did you have a lot of people telling you why in the world do you want to go in that type of environment and try to discourage you from doing so?
The biggest cynic was my father. I often refer to him as the lovable curmudgeon. And my father reminded me that teachers don't make any money, which we all know to be true.
Oh, yes.
He wanted me to wear a bulletproof vest, which I did not wear because it did not match my pearls. And he was just very fearful of the situation. You know, I had kids who actually did play guns to school with them rather than, you know, calculators or pocket detectors. And so it was definitely a dangerous and dicey environment. And my father was very fearful for me, as were some of my friends. But the more cynical they all were, the more I wanted to prove them wrong.
So here you are, you're in your early mid-20s, you're excited about teaching in 1994. You go to room 203 at Woodrow Wilson High School in Long Beach, California, and you faced your first group of students dubbed by the administration as unteachable, at-risk teenagers, basically an attitude of sure to drop out students. You go to the school, which was tough, racially divided, and gang-infested. Fights and murder as part of the students' experiences. Some kids came from bad backgrounds. What were those first few days like for you as you went into that type of environment?
It was very racially divided. Students sat in comfort zones based on race. African Americans in one corner, Latinos in another corner, Asians in another. My first period on my first day, I had one Caucasian, and he was petrified. And I remember looking at the sea of students who admitted they'd never read a book, nothing word to cover, nor did they intend to. And they kind of sized me up with my polka dots and my pearls and this perceived white privilege. And there was this sense that there's no way that this teacher's going to make it. You know, this cheerleader from hell from suburbia. How is she going to help us survive? And so my class really became like Las Vegas. Students were taking bets and wagers. How long was I going to make it? And the first story in the Freedom Writer's Diary so profoundly points out that first day where the student was actually saying that the classroom looked like a bad rerun of Cops. You know, here were all these students with rap sheets, students who'd been in juvenile hall, students who'd been in boot camp, students who'd been in continuation schools, detention programs, students who came from rehab for crystal meth or crack cocaine, students with learning disabilities, students who had ADD or ADHD, and all of them across the board score below the 25th percentile on standardized tests. And so this was not a group of students joining hands and singing Kumbaya. This was not a group of students eager to dive into books and literature and to bring reading and writing to life.
What was your attitude as you approached these students with this background? Do you go in really strict and firm? Do you go in, hey, how's everybody doing? But what kind of mindset and attitude did you convey to your students in those early days?
I think with every teacher, every good teacher, I hope to say, there's this belief that kids can make it, regardless of statistics and data and test scores. And so my mindset really was, I want to reach these kids. I want to build a bridge between what they know and what I want to teach them. And to do so, I need to know who they are and where they're coming from and what kind of baggage they're carrying with. And very early on, I realized that baggage was so dramatic and so gritty. You know, students who were standing in assembly lines at funeral parlors, students who'd been to more funerals than birthdays, students who had been to 44 foster homes before their 14th birthday, students who'd never met their deadbeat dad, students who'd been evicted and were homeless. And so how are you going to concentrate on Homer and Shakespeare when you don't know if you're going to make it home alive? I really needed to learn who these 14-year-olds were that were sitting before me, who were so angry and who had such evocative baggage and who didn't want to read or write and didn't see themselves in the pages of a book. And what I needed to give these young people a voice and to show them that through storytelling, everyone has a story, and that the most important thing for them to do is first and foremost learn from other people's stories and then be inspired to write their own.
How did they treat you in those first few days?
Initially, the students were horrendous. They threw the syllabi back at me in the form of an airplane. They tagged the desks and scrawled their names in graffiti at the classroom desks. One of the students, she wrote in her journal for 2 weeks straight, I hate Erin Gruwell. I hate Erin Gruwell. And if I wasn't on probation, I would probably shank her. And as a sweet little girl from suburbia, I didn't even know what shanking was at that point. I just knew it wasn't good. And so it was really a challenge. Here was a group of students who didn't want to be there and, felt trapped and felt ignored. And education had always been this place that had discarded them and had minimized, who they were. And so I was just another teacher and a conveyor belt of teachers who, in their minds, thought they were dumb, told them they were stupid, and treated them like they were nothing. And I had to prove them wrong.
Did you ever come to a point where you're like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, I think every teacher has those moments of frustration, even in the best of circumstances and the best of classes. Yes, I fought back tears. I questioned my profession. I listened to the proverbial, I told you so. I was ready to throw in the towel many times, but luckily, I persevered. And so I think every teacher has those moments of feeling like they're Sisyphus rolling a rock up a hill just to have the rock roll right back down. And so with education, you have to be flexible and you have to learn from your mistakes and you have to seize on those teachable moments. And so I'm just fortunate that there were so many teachable moments.
So instead of turning in your 2-week notice like most teachers would do under those circumstances, you were busy trying to form relationship with these kids and find teaching material that they would be able to relate to. And tell us about how Anne Frank fit in on this.
I think there was one moment with the racial caricature that was passed around depicting my students' facial features. A horrible moment. And what made this moment so incredibly volatile is this young student had been transferred from his previous high school because he actually did bring a gun to his English class and threatened to shoot his teacher. And so I knew that the moment was, here's a kid who's used to being picked on. When his back is against the wall, he reaches for a gun. And suddenly he is the person who's being ridiculed and picked on for something that is no fault of his own, his facial characteristics. And so I knew this was such a difficult moment. If I didn't seize upon that and make a teachable moment, that it would have erupted. And Sherrod probably would have reached for that gun, and there probably would have been a shooting. And, come Saturday morning, there would be another funeral. And come Sunday, there would be another retaliation. And that horrible cycle of violence was continued. And so that moment is what changed everything. And basically drawing a correlation between that note and Nazi propaganda artwork and the Holocaust was this riveting moment that made my students ask this critical question: what is the Holocaust? And at that moment, I realized that pain is pain, and it's universal. And it doesn't matter if you are a young Jewish boy in Poland, or if you are a kid living in the streets of an inner city like Long Beach, or someone in the streets of Bosnia-Herzegovina in the midst of ethnic cleansing. I just realized that I have got to use this horrific moment of intolerance to teach my students how to be tolerant.
Were they open to that at first, or did it take them a while for them to catch on?
They were and they weren't. I think there was more curiosity. They'd never heard of the Holocaust. They were teenagers and they'd never heard that word before. It was before Schindler's List had come out. It was before, in many schools, it was required curriculum. And so I realized in order to really bring this story to life, I have to do it in the most shocking of ways. I need to have them read Anne Frank's story and Elie Wiesel's story and take them to the Museum of Tolerance and bring in Holocaust survivors who were their age when this atrocity happened, and to have those Auschwitz survivors pull up their shirts and show their tattoo of how they were stripped of their dignity and their humanity, and really get in my students' faces and tell them, evil prevails when good people do nothing. There are millions of people who are no longer on this planet because of man's inhumanity and the things that you're doing on the streets of Long Beach because of rival gangs and because of the color of your skin or the bandana from your back pocket or the gang affiliation that you have. This is what, it's going to lead to that kind of atrocity. It may not be in record numbers as it was in Auschwitz, but no one should lose their life to senseless violence. And I think that really is what galvanized all of us to realize that evil could no longer prevail because there were good people, and those good people had to stand up and do something in the face of intolerance.
So they started making intense connections to these stories that you were presenting to them and being able to relate. And you started doing something where each student began to keep his or her own diary, recording stories that was going on and prevalent in their own lives, correct?
Yes. What we did is we started following in the footsteps of a young diarist, Anne Frank, who kept her diary and wrote to Kitty, and a young girl in Sarajevo named Sata Filippovic, who wrote to me her diary. And we started looking at the power of using a piece of paper as an obituary, or using that piece of paper as your confidant, or using that piece of paper as a way to have a cathartic moment where you could purge all of the things that you'd seen, all of the things that you experienced, and all the things that you knew, and chronicle it and put it on paper and purge it. And it became this very liberating experience that eventually brought these kids together, eventually led to finding these stories together as a book. And to this day became this incredible testament to the lives of 150 kids when we decided to take those stories and publish them in a book.
Did they give you their journals of these stories? Did you talk about them as a class? Did they just keep it to themselves initially at first?
A combination of everything. I ended up getting computers donated. And the idea of the computers was we could make these stories anonymous. We could give each kid a number, and they could type in 12-point font Times New Roman double space and turn these stories in anonymously. And we would edit them, and we would read them, and we would make suggestions, and it would inspire other kids to write that similar story. And realize I'm not alone. I'm not the only kid who's contemplated suicide. I'm not the only kid who has parents who are not available. I'm not the only kid who's been in foster care. And I think the more these stories came in, the deeper the students dove, and the more they shared it across their soul. And it was really like bearing witness. Initially, it was just experiments. We never envisioned that we would have a publishing deal. We never envisioned that it would be a book. We never envisioned that it would become curriculum in schools. And so I think for all of us, it's a very humbling experience. We just wanted to be real. And those moments of vulnerability and in those moments of exposing our story, it led to something much bigger than ourselves.
You got them on this journey of writing journals and expressing what goes on in their lives into writing. So how did it go from that point to the Freedom Writers?
I showed an amazing video about the 60s activists, the Freedom Writers, with the idea that if I could show the power of people coming together and the power of young people standing up for real change. And in watching the courage of these 1960s freedom writers who were busted, it sparked this idea that we could call ourselves freedom writers because we wrote, and that, writing was a way to set us free. And then we needed something to do with our stories. And so we had this idea that we would once again follow in the footsteps of those original freedom writers from the 60s and go to Washington, D.C. and to give our stories to someone who mattered. And we chose the Secretary of Education. And it became this life-altering experience of, 150 kids who'd never been on a plane or stayed in a hotel, and coming together and raising the money, and that importantly raising awareness of our story, and taking them to Washington, D.C., and then hand-delivering them to the Secretary of Education. It gave us the encouragement that, maybe these stories don't have to stay contained to room 203 in Long Beach, California, and Wilson High. Maybe we can get them out into the world, like a message in a bottle. And so we spent another year, like a message in a bottle, sending these stories to publishing houses. And luckily, we were able to get publishing deals from Random House, which is, at that point, it was a division of Doubleday. Ironically, I think that we didn't really know how our story was going to be perceived and who was going to be our audience. And I think, shot low, we thought, maybe the only people that will read the story will be students or maybe the classroom teachers. And the fact that it had such mainstream appeal and it's transcended, classrooms and teachers and academia, and it's being played into the hands of parents and community members and activists. I think that's the most provocative thing for all of us, is that it has made such a difference outside of what we thought was going to be the intended audience.
What was the students' reactions?
I think even to this day, I have to be honest, we are a very humble bunch, and I love that about my students. This sense of humility of, once again, it's bigger than all of us. We are blessed that people give us the opportunity to tell our story, and like about it, every time we do an interview, we just have that kind of gosh shucks mentality. And I think my students got that from Holocaust survivors. And we've met these Holocaust survivors who have tirelessly told their story. They have said repeatedly, we're telling the story for the millions of people who are no longer able to tell that story. And I think that for the students and myself, what a gift that we can speak for so many kids and so many teachers who are desperate to be noticed and have stories that are harder and more dramatic than ours. Haven't had the opportunity to get a microphone or to be interviewed or to have the public eye. Then never to lose sight of, in that moment of telling a story, make it count, make it relevant, and make it forever. And I think that's something that I really want to attribute back to those wonderful Holocaust survivors who, in that moment, being that survivor, they were telling the story of 12 million people who didn't have the opportunity to tell a story. None of these stories were censored. That all these stories really illuminate the pain and the growth and the transformation that teenagers can go through.
What would you like to see happen to inner city schools?
It's not about money. I don't think money is just like throwing Band-Aid on a shotgun wound. It's what you do with it. It's about giving teachers the liberation to teach to a kid and not to a test, and allow them to create relationships and allow them to make education relevant. You got to have smaller class size. You got to have environments where kids feel safe. And you have to have teachers who are dynamic and curious enough and critical thinkers who can say, you know what? I need to think outside the box. I need to reach these kids because this classic textbook is not doing it. And this rigid set of rules is not doing it. And it's all about making kids put down that gun and pick up a pen and using that pen to change their lives. What the Freedom Riders and I have done is really focus on creative teacher training and empowerment and making these teachers feel like they are agents of change. You know, they're accountable to every single one of those kids, and those kids are the stakeholders. And that if you mentor them and empower them and enlighten them, and at the end of the day, these kids are truly engaged in their own education, that's where you're going to see real change. It's not because we put in their hands a shiny new laptop computer. It's not because we have state-of-the-art gyms. It's really about relationships. And I think these young people are just really passionate about changing the world by changing education. And if we do so, one kid, one teacher, and one classroom at a time, that's our mission.
Of course, also there's the movie that they based on your story. The movie is called Freedom Riders. I want to thank Erin for appearing on our program.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I will partner with anyone who wants to fight the good fight for kids. So thank you for being our partner on this and for really trying to inspire teachers. Thank you for allowing this program to be a voice and to be an advocate for all those teachers who need just a little something extra. So thank you and everything that you're doing for all of those teachers out there.